Encryption was supposed to be their shield. For years, the drug gangs of Greater Manchester believed they had finally found a way to stay one step ahead of the police. They bought special phones that scrambled every message. They picked fake names so nobody could trace them. They filmed themselves with piles of cash. They posed with weapons. They photographed kilos of cocaine laid out on kitchen tables. They sent pictures of their Rolex watches, their designer clothes, and their villas abroad. They bragged to each other about how much money they were making and how untouchable they had become. They honestly believed that nobody in the world could ever see what they were sending. They were wrong. French intelligence had quietly hacked the entire network, and every single message, photo, and video was being read in real time by the police. Today we are covering the Manchester drug gangs who filmed their cash and their guns, bragged about everything online, and lost it all because of it. Section 1. Encryption was supposed to be their shield. Greater Manchester has a long and heavy history with organised crime. For decades, the city and the towns around it have been home to some of the most powerful drug gangs in the United Kingdom. Cocaine, heroin, cannabis, amphetamines and firearms have all moved through its streets in quantities that are hard to picture. Money has been made by the millions, lives have been destroyed by the thousands, and the men at the top of these gangs have spent years, sometimes entire careers, trying to find new ways to stay one step ahead of the police. For a long time, they thought they had finally done it. In the late 2000s, a new kind of mobile phone started spreading through criminal networks across Europe. It was called an EncroChat phone. From the outside, it looked like a normal smartphone, but everything about it was designed for secrecy. The camera was disabled, the microphone was disabled, the GPS was disabled. Every message sent through the device was scrambled using heavy encryption, which is a way of locking information so that only the person on the other end can read it. The phones did not work like normal phones either. You could not call a regular number. You could not send a message to a regular contact. You could only speak to other people who owned the same type of device. And every user chose a fake name, known as a handle, so that nobody knew who they were really talking to. The people selling these phones told their customers the system was impossible to crack. For a price of around £1,500 for 6 months of service, you could send photos, videos, and voice notes to other criminals anywhere in the world without any fear of being watched. The phones even had a panic feature that would wipe everything with a single code if police ever got hold of the device. To the gangs using them, EncroChat was not just a tool, it was a fortress. And because they believed the fortress could not be broken into, they stopped being careful. They started filming themselves with piles of cash. They started photographing kilos of cocaine stacked on kitchen tables. They started sending pictures of guns, ammunition, Rolex watches, and designer clothing. They started bragging about their lifestyles, their trips abroad, their villas in Spain, and their enemies back home. Some of them sent family photos. Some of them sent pictures of their children. One of them, as you will hear later, even sent a photo of a box of painkillers that would later be used to pull his fingerprint. The gangs treated EncroChat like a private members club, where nothing they said or sent could ever come back to hurt them. That was the mistake of their lives. In April 2020, French intelligence services quietly broke into the EncroChat network. For more than 2 months, they sat silently inside the system and read everything. Every message, every photo, every video, every voice note, every deal arranged, every threat made, every location shared. The users had no idea. They kept chatting, they kept bragging, they kept filming themselves counting money and showing off weapons. And all of it was being copied, saved, and shared with police forces across Europe. The information was passed to the National Crime Agency in the United Kingdom, which then shared it with local police forces, including Greater Manchester Police. The operation was given a name. It was called Operation Venetic, and it became the largest law enforcement operation in British history. What the police found when they started reading those messages was staggering. Manchester, Salford, Wigan, Bury, Rochdale, Oldham, Middleton, and the towns around them were full of men who thought they were untouchable. Ringleaders were openly discussing cocaine shipments worth tens of millions of pounds. Money launderers were moving £2 million every single month. Gun traffickers were importing weapons like AK-47 rifles into the country. Hitmen were being hired to carry out attacks. One gang leader, operating from Spain, was ordering a shooting in Warrington, in which the gunman would dress up as a pizza delivery man. And through all of it, they were posing, filming, and photographing themselves, confident that nobody would ever see what they were doing. The numbers from Operation Venetic tell the story of what happened next. More than 2,200 criminals have now been convicted as a result of the hack. More than 3,300 arrests have been made. Over 2,000 suspects have been charged. Courts across the UK have handed down more than 10,600 combined years of prison sentences. Nearly 6.5 tons of cocaine have been seized, more than 3 tons of heroin, more than 20 tons of cannabis. 173 firearms have been taken off the streets, along with almost 3,500 rounds of ammunition. More than £84 million of criminal cash has been recovered, and over 200 threats to life have been stopped before they could happen. Greater Manchester alone accounts for a huge share of those numbers. The city region has seen some of the biggest gang takedowns in the whole operation, and in case after case, a single pattern keeps repeating itself. The more powerful the gang, the louder they bragged. The louder they bragged, the more evidence they created. The more evidence they created, the longer the sentences became. What follows are the stories of the Manchester gangs who got too comfortable on a system they thought was safe. The men who filmed their cash. The men who posed with their weapons. The men who compared themselves to drug lords from Netflix shows. The men who sent selfies from their gardens during lockdown. And the men who will now spend the better part of their lives behind bars because of it. The first of them lived on a quiet street in Atherton, and his downfall began with a single smiling photograph in his own back garden. Section 2. Leon Atkinson, the Wigan kingpin brought down by a beer selfie. In the spring of 2020, while most of the United Kingdom was locked inside their homes during the first wave of the coronavirus pandemic, a 41-year-old man from Wigan was running one of the most profitable cocaine operations in the northwest of England. His name was Leon Atkinson. He lived on Brindley Close in Atherton, a quiet street in a quiet town, and from the outside, his life looked completely normal. He was a local man. He was just another resident of Greater Manchester getting through lockdown like everyone else. Behind the scenes, Atkinson was at the top of a drug gang that would move more than £9 million worth of cocaine in just 3 months between March and June of that year. The operation was sophisticated. Atkinson and his crew used EncroChat phones to run the entire business. Each user picked a fake handle so nobody could trace who was actually sending the messages. Detectives who later looked at the phone records could see everything the gang was doing, but they could not see the real names behind the handles. They knew somebody was buying multi-kilo shipments of cocaine. They knew somebody was arranging the transport. They knew somebody was pulling the strings at the top. But for a while, they did not know exactly who those people were. Then Leon Atkinson did something that no drug kingpin should ever do. He took a photo of himself drinking a beer in his own back garden, smiling at the camera, and sent it through his EncroChat phone to a leading member of another drug gang. He thought the photo could never be seen by anyone outside that encrypted network. He was wrong. French intelligence had already cracked the system, and Greater Manchester Police were reading everything in real time. That one image changed everything. Detectives now had a face to match to a handle. Once they knew which handle belonged to Atkinson, they could go back through every message he had sent, every deal he had arranged, every person he had been speaking to, and build a complete picture of the entire network he was running. The beer selfie, taken during a lockdown drink in the sunshine, became the single piece of evidence that unlocked the whole case. The messages revealed the scale of what Atkinson and his team had been doing. Manchester Crown Court heard that the gang had transferred more than £9 million through the cocaine business in just 3 months. One member, 46-year-old Abdul Ghaffar, of Halifax Road in Nelson, was directly involved in transferring 4 kilograms of cocaine and at least £6.5 million. 2 others, 37-year-old Adam Marsden of Taunton Avenue in Rochdale and 31-year-old Nathan Powell of Cheney Close in Openshaw, were identified as distributors, who together sourced and supplied more than 40 kilograms of Class A drugs. A 5th man, 39-year-old Romiz Ahmed of Rossall Road in Rochdale, did not even own an EncroChat phone, but he was still caught as the money launderer for the gang. Detectives found he had moved at least £1.9 million in the 3-month window that the messages covered. When the law enforcement hammer finally came down on the EncroChat network in the summer of 2020, Operation Venetic began the biggest wave of arrests the UK had ever seen. Atkinson and his associates were pulled in one by one. The evidence against them was overwhelming. They had bragged to each other about the size of their deals. They had shared photos of cash. They had described exactly what they were doing, who they were doing it with, and how much money was changing hands. All of it was now sitting in police files. Atkinson, Marsden and Ghaffar all admitted conspiracy to supply Class A drugs and conspiracy to transfer criminal property. Powell pleaded guilty to the same offences. Ahmed fought his case at trial, but was found guilty by a jury of conspiracy to transfer criminal property and being concerned in an arrangement which facilitates the acquisition, retention, use, or control of criminal property. The sentences came down at Manchester Crown Court across 2 days in May of 2022. Leon Atkinson, the man at the top, the man whose beer selfie had brought the whole thing crashing down, was jailed for 15 years. Adam Marsden was jailed for 9 years and 8 months. Abdul Ghaffar was jailed for 8 years and 8 months. Nathan Powell was sentenced to a long prison term in the same week. Ramiz Ahmed, the money launderer, was ordered to serve 6 years behind bars. In total, the 5 men received almost 4 decades of prison time between them. Detective Inspector Roger Smethurst, from the Serious and Organised Crime Group at Greater Manchester Police, spoke after the sentencing. He called the group an extremely sophisticated drugs gang that had been flooding communities across the northwest with cocaine, and he said they had shown no shame in profiting from the misery, violence, and damage that their product left behind. He added that the sentences showed the unprecedented damage that law enforcement was now able to inflict on multi-million-pound gangs because of the EncroChat breakthrough. His message to other criminals still out there was simple. Nobody was untouchable. Nobody was safe from detection, and organised crime would keep being a top priority for the force. Leon Atkinson is now serving his sentence, stripped of the wealth he had built up, stripped of the designer items and vehicles that had been seized, and stripped of the freedom he had felt so comfortable with back in that sunny garden in Atherton. One photograph of a man enjoying a beer in his own home ended the empire he had spent years building. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Atkinson thought he was the biggest operator in his corner of the Northwest, but while he was busy raising a bottle to the camera, another man sitting in a house near Liverpool was already comparing himself to one of the most famous drug lords in the world, and that man was about to make an even bigger mistake. Section 3. Jonathan Cassidy, the Manchester kingpin who thought he was El Chapo. Jonathan Cassidy was born on the 4th of April 1973. By the time he was in his late 40s, he had built a cocaine importation network so large that Greater Manchester Police and the National Crime Agency believed he had brought around £26 million worth of drugs into the United Kingdom. He lived on Whitewood Park in the Crosby area near Liverpool, but his business stretched across the whole of the northwest of England, reaching into Manchester, Leeds, Birmingham and Glasgow. To anyone watching from the outside, Cassidy looked like a former builder who had done well for himself. Inside the world of organised crime, he was a wholesale importer who was bringing in cocaine by the kilo from the biggest cartels in South America. Cassidy ran his operation through an EncroChat handle called Whiskey Wasp. His main business partner was a 51-year-old man from Bury called Nasser Ahmed, who lived on Morton Drive and used the handle Dotted Jaw. Ahmed acted as a money transfer agent, moving the huge amounts of cash that came back from street-level sales and turning it into funds that could be sent abroad to pay the suppliers. Between them, Cassidy and Ahmed organised the purchase of 356 kilograms of cocaine. The drugs were sourced from Colombia, Bolivia, Brazil and Ecuador, sent to Amsterdam and then shipped into the UK in 2 large consignments during March and April of 2020. The estimated street value of those 356 kilograms was around £28 million. In the same 3-month period, close to £10 million in cash passed through the operation. What made Cassidy stand out from every other gang boss the police were tracking was his ego. He did not just use his EncroChat phone for business, he used it for everyday life. He sent photos of his family. He sent pictures from nights out. He sent messages about holidays and birthdays and television shows. He fully believed the phone was untraceable, and because he believed that, he let his guard down completely. One evening, he was sitting at home, watching an episode of the Netflix series Narcos, which tells the story of the Mexican drug lord known as El Chapo. Cassidy noticed that El Chapo shared his birthday, the 4th of April, and he could not resist sending a picture to one of his friends, making a joke about how the two of them had been born on the same day. His friend messaged back and said, "Coincidence? I think not." To Cassidy, it was a bit of fun between two criminals. To Greater Manchester Police, reading the messages months later, it was a clear window into how he saw himself. He was not just a drug dealer, he thought he was on the same level as one of the most wanted men in the world. The bragging did not stop there. On the 18th of May 2020, Cassidy sent a message about a group of officers he had spotted. He called them scruffy men with rucksacks. The timing of that message lined up exactly with the arrest of one of his associates by plain-clothed police. Detectives later used that kind of timing again and again, matching messages to real-world events, to prove beyond doubt that the man behind the handle Whiskey Wasp was Jonathan Cassidy. There was also the photo of the painkillers. At one point, Cassidy sent a friend a picture of a simple box of Panadol. It looked like nothing. It was the kind of photo anyone might send as a joke or in passing. But when forensic experts examined the image, they found that the quality of the picture was so sharp that they could lift the fingerprint of the person holding the box. A drug kingpin who believed he was safe had just handed the police his own fingerprint through a phone he trusted with his life. By the summer of 2020, the EncroChat network had been shut down, and news was spreading through the criminal underworld that something was badly wrong. On the 15th of June 2020, Nassar Ahmed was arrested at his home in Bury. That was the signal for Cassidy. On the 8th of July, he fled to Dubai. Once there, he began viewing a luxury villa priced at £2.3 million. He even put in a request for a bed that was going to cost him £22,000 on its own. For a few weeks, he felt safe. Then he made the worst decision of his life. Believing that he had got away with it, Cassidy flew back to the UK on the 17th of October 2020. He was arrested the moment he landed at Manchester Airport. When police searched his home on Whitewood Park, they recovered £24,430 in cash, a United Arab Emirates residence card, a UAE driving licence, a huge amount of designer clothing, and a Rolex Perpetual watch worth around £250,000. Every item told the story of a man who had been living the life of a kingpin while pretending to be an ordinary resident of Merseyside. The legal battle that followed was long and complicated. Cassidy and Ahmed fought for years over whether EncroChat messages could even be used as evidence in a British courtroom. In the end, Judge Nicholas Dean, the Recorder of Manchester, ruled that the messages were lawfully obtained and could be used. Facing an overwhelming case, Cassidy pleaded guilty to conspiracy to import cocaine, conspiracy to supply cocaine, and conspiracy to conceal, transfer, and disguise criminal proceeds. On the 21st of March 2024, at Manchester Crown Court, he was sentenced to 21 years and 9 months behind bars. Nassar Ahmed received the exact same sentence of 21 years and 9 months for the same offences. Jonathan Cassidy had spent months telling himself he was the British El Chapo. The Narcos joke that he once sent to a friend became one of the most famous pieces of evidence in the whole Operation Venetic investigation. But Cassidy did not do it alone. Working alongside him, passing on instructions and keeping the books for the entire operation was his younger brother, a man whose name had once been written into the record books of one of the most famous football clubs in England. Section 4. Jaime Cassidy, the Liverpool football prodigy turned nuclear dog. Jaime Cassidy was born on the 21st of November 1977. He grew up in Liverpool, and from the moment he was old enough to kick a ball, it was clear he had something special. As a boy, he was one of the most talented young footballers in the country. By the age of 15, he was the leading goal scorer for the England youth team, and in the summer of 1994, he netted 3 goals at the European Championships at that age group. He was offered a place at the FA School of Excellence at Lilleshall, the training centre where the best young players in the country were being developed into future stars. Then came his biggest break. He joined the youth academy at Liverpool Football Club, the team he had supported all his life. He trained alongside boys who would go on to become household names. One of his teammates was Jaime Cassidy, who would later play more than 500 first-team games for Liverpool and become a club legend. Another was Michael Owen, who would go on to win the Ballon d'Or as the best footballer in Europe. Jaime Cassidy was considered just as promising as either of them. In his 2008 autobiography, Jaime Cassidy wrote that Cassidy would have been a certain Liverpool regular if he had not suffered so much with injuries. Steven Gerrard, another legendary Liverpool captain, also mentioned him in his own 2006 autobiography, talking about his quality as a person and a player. As a teenager, Cassidy was part of the Liverpool team that won the club's very first FA Youth Cup, beating a famous West Ham side in the final. That West Ham team included Rio Ferdinand and Frank Lampard, 2 men who would later win almost everything in the English game. Cassidy was expected to sit at that same top table. But football is a brutal sport, and it can end a career overnight. Injury after injury tore into him. The minutes on the pitch dried up. The chances to prove himself disappeared. Eventually, Liverpool released him. The boy who had once been England's leading youth scorer was left with nothing. What happened over the next 2 decades turned a sporting tragedy into something far darker. Cassidy's older brother Jonathan had been quietly building a criminal empire, and somewhere along the way, Jaime was pulled into the family business. By the spring of 2020, while French intelligence was silently reading every message on the EncroChat network, Jaime Cassidy was sitting in Knowsley, Merseyside, typing messages under the handle Nuclear Dog. The prosecution at Manchester Crown Court laid out exactly what he had been doing. Richard Wright KC, the lead prosecutor, told the court that Jaime Cassidy had been paid a wage for his role in the cocaine operation run by his brother and by Nassar Ahmed. He was not a kingpin, but he was the man in the middle. He directed a team of drug dealers who sold cocaine to clients in Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds, Birmingham and Glasgow. He oversaw the collection of cash. He passed on instructions from the top, and he acted as the bookkeeper for the entire business, keeping track of what was owed and what was coming in. The competitive drive that had once pushed him to score goals for England had been turned into a full-time career in organised crime. The prosecutor said that although Cassidy had no personal part in the importation of the drugs, he still played a significant role in the conspiracy, passing on orders and acting on the direction of others to make sure operations ran smoothly. His own defence barrister, Paul Greeny KC, tried to soften the picture. He told the court that Cassidy did not share in the profits of the drug sales, that he was on a fixed wage, and that he was acting under a significant degree of control, with only a limited degree of autonomy. He called him a footballer of exceptional talent and promise, and asked the court to remember who he had been before everything fell apart. Jaime Cassidy was arrested on the 5th of November 2020 at his home in Knowsley. A month earlier, his brother had been picked up at Manchester Airport. When officers searched Jamie's property, they found an encrypted phone, a large black machete, and a police case summary of the very drug operation the officers were running against him. The court also heard during sentencing that Cassidy had been working as a prison listener with the Samaritans, a role where inmates in British prisons volunteer to support other inmates who are struggling with their mental health. It was one of the most unusual details in the whole case. The man helping other prisoners through dark moments was, at the same time, a senior member of a cocaine network worth tens of millions of pounds. Like his brother, Jaime Cassidy admitted conspiracy to supply Class A drugs and conspiracy to launder money. Judge Nicholas Dean, the Recorder of Manchester, decided that while he was heavily involved, his role was more limited than that of Jonathan Cassidy and Nassar Ahmed. On the 21st of March 2024, at Manchester Crown Court, Jaime Cassidy was sentenced to 13 years and 3 months behind bars. The story of the 2 Cassidy brothers became one of the most talked about moments in the entire Operation Venetic investigation. The older one had compared himself to El Chapo while watching Narcos. The younger one had once been tipped to play for England. Both of them had bought into the idea that EncroChat would keep their secrets safe. Both of them had used the platform to chat about everyday life as well as business. And both of them walked out of Manchester Crown Court on the same day, facing sentences that would take them well into old age before they tasted freedom again. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The Cassidy brothers had been caught out by their own comfort with the system, but the single most striking example of that false sense of security involved neither cocaine nor cash, but a simple photograph of a box of tablets sent between friends. And that one picture is where the story goes next. Section 5. The Panadol box. How a careless photo lifted a fingerprint. One of the strangest moments in the entire Operation Venetic investigation did not involve a kilo of cocaine, a bag of cash, or a firearm. It involved a small cardboard box of ordinary painkillers. The kind of box you can pick up at any chemist for a few pounds. The kind of thing nobody would ever think twice about. And yet that one item, photographed casually and sent through an EncroChat phone, became one of the most quietly damaging pieces of evidence Greater Manchester Police ever collected against a gang boss. The man who sent the photo was Jaime Cassidy. By the time the picture was taken, he was already running a cocaine importation network worth tens of millions of pounds. He was using the handle Whiskey Wasp and speaking daily to a network of international suppliers, money launderers, and distributors. On paper, a man like that should have been the most careful criminal in the northwest of England. Every message, every voice note, every photo should have been treated as a potential weapon against him. That was not how Cassidy treated his phone at all. He trusted it completely. He trusted it because the people who had sold him the device told him it could not be cracked. He trusted it because every criminal he knew had one. He trusted it because he had been using it for months with no consequences. He trusted it because he honestly believed he was untouchable. And once that trust set in, the line between business phone and personal phone disappeared. The device that he was supposed to use only for drug deals started to become the device he used for everything. Greater Manchester Police later described exactly how that mindset played out across the gang. In their official statement, they explained that the phones were not just being used as dirty phones to conduct business on. The men had blurred the lines between work and life. They began using the devices for everyday conversations, sharing photos of their families, their special occasions, their holidays, and all kinds of small moments that had nothing to do with drugs. They were acting like a group of mates sharing everything on a WhatsApp group. The only difference was that the mates in this case happened to be running a cocaine empire, and the WhatsApp group happened to be under live surveillance by European police. That was the mindset that led Cassidy to pick up his phone one day, snap a picture of a box of Panadol, and send it to someone he knew. There was nothing criminal in the photo. There was no powder, no cash, no weapon, no face. It was just a simple picture of a boring household item. Exactly the kind of photo that anyone might send without even thinking about it. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe it was about a headache. Maybe he was asking about a brand. The exact reason was never made public. What matters is what happened after the image was captured. When detectives later analysed the picture as part of their investigation, they realised something that Cassidy never imagined could be possible. The image was so sharp and the camera quality on the phone was so high that forensic experts were able to look at the fingers wrapped around the cardboard box and pull out the fingerprint of the person who was holding it. A photograph of a box of painkillers had just handed the police the single most personal piece of identification a human being has. Greater Manchester Police confirmed this in their own press statement when the case concluded at Manchester Crown Court. They said that the picture was of sufficient quality that experts could obtain the fingerprint of the person holding the box. Think about what that means for a moment. The whole reason Cassidy and his associates were using EncroChat in the first place was to stay hidden. The fake handles, the encrypted messages, the deleted camera roll, the panic wipe function, all of it was designed to strip away their real identities and make them ghosts inside the network. One careless photo undid all of that. A man who had spent years hiding behind the name Whiskey Wasp had just accidentally attached his fingerprint to his own file in a police database. This was not a one-off. It was part of a much bigger pattern that played out again and again across the Operation Venetic cases. The more powerful a gang became, the more comfortable they got. The more comfortable they got, the less careful they became. The less careful they became, the more evidence they created with their own hands. Leon Atkinson had done it by sending a beer photo from his garden during lockdown. Jaime Cassidy had done it by joking about sharing a birthday with El Chapo while he watched Narcos. Now he was doing it again, this time with a box of household tablets, and every bit of it was being filed away by detectives who would later use it against him at Manchester Crown Court. The Panadol photo is important for a reason that goes beyond the Cassidy case. It showed the world just how thin the line really was between a so-called untouchable criminal and a man sat in a prison cell for decades. A beer, a joke about a Netflix show, a photo of a medicine cabinet item. None of these things looked like dangerous mistakes at the time they were made. All of them became part of the evidence bundle that helped send their owners behind bars. And all of them told the same simple truth. When criminals forget that someone might be watching, they always give themselves away. Not every Operation Venetic case centred on a cocaine importer running things from the comfort of his living room. Some involve men who were far more violent, who travelled across Europe with guns and ammunition, and who ordered serious acts of harm on their rivals from hotel rooms abroad. The next story is one of the most dangerous of them all. Section 6. Jaime Rothwell, the Salford drug lord who danced for the camera. Jaime Rothwell was born 38 years before he walked into Manchester Crown Court for his final sentencing hearing, and for most of his adult life, he had been a name that Greater Manchester Police knew well. He grew up in Salford, a city with its own long history of gang activity, and he had already built up a record for robbery, possession of a weapon, and dealing drugs by the time his name started appearing in the biggest Operation Venetic files of them all. His last registered address in the UK was on Grindon Avenue in Salford. By the time police finally caught up with him, he had not lived there for years. He had been running his empire from the sunshine of southern Europe. Rothwell was not just another cocaine dealer. He was one of the most dangerous organised criminals operating in the northwest of England. He was wanted over a shooting in Salford from 2015, although he would later be cleared of that charge at trial in the summer of 2020. While that court case was unfolding, he was also at the top of a drug and firearms network that stretched across the UK, Spain, and the Netherlands. The street value of the cocaine he moved was estimated at around £26 million. The judge at his final hearing said he had dealt more than 200 kilograms of cocaine and 5 kilograms of ketamine. On top of that, he was trafficking high-powered firearms, including an AK-47 assault rifle, along with large amounts of live ammunition. Rothwell ran everything through an EncroChat phone under the handle Live Long. He used that phone to buy drugs, sell drugs, order weapons, and manage his people back home in the UK. He also used it, like so many other gang bosses, to send photos of himself. One of those photos, a simple selfie, would be the moment police put his real face to the Live Long handle. From the comfort of a high-rise apartment overlooking Barcelona, Rothwell had accidentally handed detectives exactly what they needed to start building a case against him. The messages on his phone painted a picture of a man who was deeply paranoid about a rival and ready to spend serious money to get at him. That rival was another Northwest gang boss called Leon Cullen, who at the time had fled to Dubai and would later be jailed at Liverpool Crown Court in May 2021 for 22.5 years. Rothwell was convinced that Cullen had tried to have him killed, and he was not willing to let it go. On the 5th of April 2020, less than 3 weeks before a serious attack would take place in Warrington, Rothwell sent a chilling message. He said he had given Leon a way out. He called him a grass. He said Leon had turned on him for nothing, and that when Cullen landed back in the UK, that was when everything would start. Rothwell did not carry out any attacks himself. He put the work out to tender, which means he offered large amounts of cash to anyone willing to do the job. On the evening of Friday the 24th of April 2020, a 56-year-old man was tracked down at his home on Poplars Avenue in Warrington. The victim, who was the stepfather of a man closely linked to the Cullen gang, was attacked on his own doorstep by a gunman who had shown up pretending to be a pizza delivery driver. He was shot in the leg and left with life-changing injuries that meant he would never walk the same way again. 3 men had travelled to Warrington together to carry out the attack on Rothwell's orders. One of them, Fitzpatrick, had provided the weapon. Another, Bretherton, was the one who pulled the trigger. The third, Morris, had been the driver. When Cheshire Police and Greater Manchester Police worked out who was behind it all, Rothwell fled from Spain to the Netherlands. He was arrested on the 14th of December 2020 as he travelled through Amsterdam in a taxi, picked up after UK detectives obtained a European arrest warrant. He was extradited back to the United Kingdom on the 11th of March 2021. While he was behind bars in Britain, he was also tied back to his separate time in Barcelona, where armed Spanish officers had stormed his apartment in an earlier raid. A famous piece of video footage from that raid showed Rothwell dancing for the camera as police closed in on him. It was pure arrogance, caught on film, from a man who still believed he was untouchable. In February 2025, he finally gave up the fight. Rothwell pleaded guilty to conspiracy to possess firearms with intent to endanger life, conspiracy to possess ammunition with intent to endanger life, conspiracy to supply cocaine, conspiracy to supply ketamine, and 2 counts of conspiracy to cause grievous bodily harm with intent. On the 14th of August 2025, at Manchester Crown Court, he was sentenced to 43 years in prison. The judge broke the sentence down into 18 years for the drugs offences and 25 years for the firearms and violence charges, to be served one after the other. 9 of his associates were sentenced at the same time, or at earlier hearings, for a combined total of 163 years and 11 months. The overall operation brought down almost 207 years of prison time. Among the men jailed alongside him were Craig Makinson of Winstanley, sentenced to 38 years. Callum Morris of Atherton, sentenced to 38 years, including a conviction for conspiracy to murder. James Close of Lee, sentenced to 36 years. Zach Rourke of Bolton, sentenced to 18 years. The list went on and on. It was one of the biggest organised crime takedowns Greater Manchester had ever seen. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Rothwell had run a global operation from Spanish apartments and Dutch taxis. In the end, a single selfie and an encrypted phone that was never really encrypted finished him. But while he was one of the most dangerous men in the entire EncroChat story, the next gang boss in this list never even touched that network. His bragging happened somewhere much more public. Section 7. Justin Shaw, the YouTube rapper who filmed himself into a 9-year sentence. Justin Shaw was born on the 4th of March 2002. By the time he was 22 years old, he was living on Richmond Grove East in Longsight, one of the inner city areas of Manchester, and he had spent almost the entire stretch of his adult life running one of the busiest street-level supply lines in the region. His operation was known locally as the MJ line, and it sold crack cocaine, heroin, and cannabis to users across the community. Unlike the EncroChat kingpins who hid behind fake handles and encrypted networks, Justin Shaw did something far more reckless. He filmed himself. He stood in front of a camera. He turned his own crimes into content and uploaded it to YouTube. Shaw went by the name JS, also written as J Shaw, and he built up a following as a young rapper from the Longsight area. The style of music he made is known as drill, a genre that often talks about street life, rival areas, and money. What made Shaw stand out was not his skill on the microphone, it was the content of his videos. He was not making up a character or telling a story that somebody else lived. He was filming his real life. His songs bragged openly about the drug dealing he was doing. They glorified the crimes he was committing. They talked about how much money he was making from the MJ line. And he uploaded all of it to a public platform where anyone in the world, including Greater Manchester Police, could watch it for free. The MJ line itself was a huge operation. It ran from 2019 through to 2024, a full 5 years, and during that time, it became one of the busiest dedicated drug lines in that part of Manchester. Detectives from the City of Manchester Central Challenger team later measured just how busy it really was. In a single week in February 2024, the phone line used by the MJ operation handled 732 outgoing calls and an incredible 3,026 incoming calls. That is thousands of customer contacts in 7 days. When officers used those numbers to work out what the total sales would have been across the full 5 years of the operation, the final figure was staggering. Justin Shaw had run a drug line worth more than £5.2 million. Shaw did not run this empire on his own. he used people around him to take the risks for him. In their official statement, Greater Manchester Police said that Shaw employed vulnerable people in the community to supply drugs on his behalf. He also targeted vulnerable people to use their addresses to prepare and store drugs for onward sale. That practice is known as cuckooing, where a drug dealer takes over the home of a person who cannot fight back, turning their flat or house into a stash point. It is one of the most damaging tactics used by modern drug gangs, and Shaw was doing it while uploading music videos, bragging about the lifestyle it was paying for. The police investigation into him took time. Detectives carried out a warrant at an address linked to Shaw in the Longsight area on the 25th of October 2022. When they went inside, they recovered iPhones, more than £1,000 in cash, and a quantity of cannabis. The phones were then sent away to be examined by specialist officers. What came back was a goldmine of evidence. Both handsets were full of messages and videos that clearly showed Shaw was involved in the supply of Class A drugs to members of the community. In other words, he had been filming and texting about his own crimes on his own phones and then keeping those files on the device. Like the EncroChat bosses before him, he had trusted that nothing he saved would ever be seen. On top of the phone evidence and the YouTube videos, police seized another device linked to Shaw and moved in to arrest him in September 2023. He was questioned about being concerned in the supply of Class A drugs. The case against him was built up slowly and carefully. By the time it reached Manchester Crown Court, prosecutors had a picture of a man who had run a major drug line for 5 full years, who had exploited people at the bottom of the chain, and who had publicly boasted about the whole thing on a video platform that is watched by hundreds of millions of people. Shaw was charged with being concerned in the supply of Class A drugs over a 5-year period, starting in 2019 and ending in 2024. On the 13th of February 2025, he was sentenced at Manchester Crown Court to 9 years behind bars. The man who had spent his early 20s turning himself into a drill music character had just been turned into a prisoner by the exact same videos he had used to build his name. Detective Constable Shahet from the City of Manchester Central Challenger team spoke after the sentencing. He called the investigation a lengthy probe into a prolific and dangerous drug dealer. He said that officers had carried out several warrants and seized a large amount of cash and devices, which allowed them to fully investigate Shaw. He confirmed that the Challenger team had worked out that Shaw had conducted drug dealings estimated to be worth over £5 million in a 5-year period, and he said the sentence was the culmination of a thorough investigation which put behind bars a man who had not only exploited young and vulnerable people to work for him, but had also exploited vulnerable people who were already suffering from drug addiction for his own profit. Justin Shaw made a very simple mistake that the old EncroChat bosses would have understood instantly. He confused his own sense of confidence with real security. He confused a camera with a shield. He thought that filming his crimes, rapping about his crimes, and uploading his crimes to YouTube made him powerful. In the end, it just made him easier to catch. But while Shaw was filming music videos in Longsight, another Manchester crew was quietly collecting £2 million a month in drug money. And they were about to find out that the so-called safe network they were using had been watching them the whole time. Section 8. Nathan Lobley and the Caratoxic crew. £5.8 million in 2 months. On a normal weekday evening in Greater Manchester, most people are finishing work, picking their kids up, or heading home for dinner. In the spring of 2020, while the rest of the country was locked down and the streets were almost empty, 4 men across Manchester, Middleton, Chadderton and Rochdale were quietly running one of the most profitable cash collection operations in British criminal history. They were the men behind the handles Caratoxic, Lovely Seal, Paperboard and Orgeroo. And between the 16th of March and the 31st of May 2020, just 2.5 months, their operation moved £5.8 million in drug money. The man at the centre of it all was Nathan Lobley. He was born on the 21st of October 1985, lived on Ashfield Drive in the Newton Heath area of Manchester, and used the EncroChat handle Caratoxic. Lobley was not a street-level dealer. He was a mid to upper-level supplier who handled cocaine in large quantities and pushed it onto other dealers. Court records later revealed that he had taken possession of at least 19 kilograms of cocaine During the window, police were able to investigate. The street value of those 19 kilograms was estimated at between £684,000 and £798,000. On top of the drugs, Lobley was also discussing something far more serious with another encrypted handle. He was arranging to pass a firearm and ammunition onto a third party. It was the kind of message that any normal person would never dream of putting in writing. Lobley was typing it out because he genuinely believed nobody would ever read it. Sitting underneath Lobley in the structure of the operation was Thomas Bradley. Born on the 4th of October 1990, Bradley lived on Mellilew Street in Middleton. His handle was Lovely Seal, and his role was pure cash. Bradley was the collector. He was the man who turned up at doors, met other handles, and took in the money that had been made by the drug deals happening further down the chain. Greater Manchester Police later identified him as someone who was collecting cash from 20 other encrypted handles. That is 20 separate dealers, all feeding their takings into one man. He was doing it on an almost daily basis, and the total that passed through his hands during the EncroChat window reached £2 million every single month. By the end of that 2.5-month period, the figure had climbed to £5.8 million in total. The third man was Craig Ganson. He was born on the 16th of May 1981, lived on Fernhurst Street in Chadderton, and went by the handle Paperboard. Ganson was the wholesale regional supplier. He bought drugs in from higher-level suppliers and fed the product down into the crew. Between the 2nd of April 2020 and the 10th of June 2020, Ganson personally purchased at least 11 kilograms of cocaine and 2 kilograms of heroin. The combined value of those drugs was placed at more than £400,000. Without Ganson, the crew had no product. Without the product, there was nothing for Lobley to move and nothing for Bradley to collect money on. The fourth man was Paul Taylor. Born on the 5th of August 1977, Taylor lived on Pargate Close in the Norden area of Rochdale. His handle was Orgeroo. He was directly involved in supplying Class A drugs and in moving money alongside the rest of the crew. He did not sit at the top of the chain, but the messages showed he was a trusted part of the network, handling a share of the drugs and helping to keep the cash flowing. What made this case so striking, and what made it such a clear warning about the EncroChat mindset, was how openly the men chatted. Detective Constable David Grimshaw of the Greater Manchester Police Serious Organised Crime Group later summed it up in one simple sentence. He said that the men thought they were hiding behind an encrypted communication system that would mean identifying them would be difficult. He said that it was not. He said that they openly communicated through the system, and that is what led them straight to prison. They discussed quantities, they discussed prices, they discussed who owed what to who, they discussed firearm handovers, they discussed rival groups, and every single message was being copied into a file that would one day sit on a Manchester Crown Court prosecutor's desk. When the EncroChat network collapsed in the summer of 2020, the crew started to realise that something was wrong. Thomas Bradley decided not to wait around. On the 22nd of March 2022, after a major strike day by Greater Manchester Police, he went on the run. For months he stayed out of reach. Then on the 3rd of December 2022, he made the same mistake that Jaime Cassidy had made before him. He tried to come home. Bradley was arrested returning to the UK through Holyhead, the Welsh ferry port, the moment he stepped back onto British soil. The case finally reached court in June 2024. All 4 men were sentenced at Manchester Minchell Street Crown Court on the 13th of June. Nathan Lobley received the heaviest punishment of the 4, jailed for 14 years for conspiracy to supply Class A and Class B drugs and for supplying a firearm and ammunition. Thomas Bradley was jailed for 9 years for conspiracy to supply Class A and Class B drugs and for money laundering. Craig Ganson was jailed for 7 years and 10 months for conspiracy to supply Class A drugs. Paul Taylor was jailed for 5 years and 8 months for conspiracy to supply Class A drugs and for money laundering. Together, the 4 of them were handed a combined total of 36 years and 6 months behind bars. They had trusted the system had handed them to the police, and nothing about their story is unique inside Manchester. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But the biggest gang of them all, the one that ended with more than 200 combined years in prison, was still coming, and its leader did not live in Salford or Wigan or Middleton. He lived on a quiet street in Manchester itself. Section 9. The Jonathan Smith OCG. Over 200 years for a multi-million-pound cocaine conspiracy. Jonathan Smith was born on the 21st of February 1983. He lived on Swinstead Avenue in Manchester, on a road where neighbours would have no idea what he did for a living. From the outside, he looked like any other man in his 40s going about his daily life. Behind the quiet front door, he was the top man in one of the biggest cocaine operations Greater Manchester Police had ever brought to court. By the time the final verdicts came in, the group he led had been linked to the movement of at least 75 kilograms of high-purity cocaine, worth around £7.5 million on the street, and 16 men in total would walk out of Manchester Crown Court with more than 200 combined years of prison time hanging over them. The investigation that would end Smith started by accident. In the summer of 2022, specialist detectives from the Serious Organised Crime Group at Greater Manchester Police were not chasing him at all. They were looking at another gang run by a man called James Mulligan. That case had been given the codename Operation Bowler, and during surveillance on Mulligan, officers began to notice two other men turning up at meetings again and again. One of them was Jonathan Smith. The other was Lewis Cleworth. Those two men, who had been quietly building their own operation in the background, had just walked straight into the sights of a major police investigation. Mulligan was arrested in October 2021 as part of the original case, and the reaction from Smith was immediate. The day after the arrest, he stopped using his mobile phone. He also stopped driving through areas where he knew police had automatic number plate recognition cameras, such as Nelson and Blackpool. The pressure was clearly getting to him. Rather than stop the operation altogether, the group pulled Jonathan Smith out of his hands-on role and replaced him with a younger relative. That was Jacob Smith, born on the 2nd of June 1990, who lived on Higher Wood Street in Middleton. Jacob took over the courier duties and kept the cocaine moving until March 2022. By that point, the rest of the gang believed the police interest had faded, and Jonathan Smith confidently returned to work. What he did not know was that the entire operation was still being watched, every single day, by the officers who had first spotted him. Louis Cleworth, born on the 19th of February 1987 and living on Hawkshead Drive in Middleton, sat near the very top of the group alongside Smith. Below them sat a network of couriers, suppliers and customers spread across Greater Manchester, Lancashire and West Yorkshire. Surveillance officers logged more than 150 separate journeys between Middleton and delivery sites around the region during the conspiracy period, all of them linked to the supply of Class A drugs. The police used phone analysis, number plate cameras and live observation to build a complete picture of every move the gang made. The big break came on the 5th of May 2022. Officers watching Stake Hill Lane in Middleton saw a deal take place between Rhys Story, born on the 23rd of August 1990 and living on Newby Drive in Middleton, and a man called Mark Haig. Haig drove back towards West Yorkshire. Police stopped him on Scholes Street in Bradford. Inside his car they found two solid parcels wrapped in brown parcel tape and plastic. Each parcel was marked with a distinctive tiger emblem on the packaging. When the contents were tested, they were confirmed as high-purity cocaine. The next day, on the 6th of May, officers moved in on Cleworth at his Middleton address and arrested him. The case had taken a huge step forward in 48 hours. From there, the arrests kept coming. Kyle Salt, born on the 9th of January 1992 and living on Alan Roberts Road in Newton Heath, was another key player in the operation. James Kilcourse, born on the 13th of February 1967 and living on Borshaw Clough Way in Middleton, added decades of experience to the network. On top of them were the distributors like David Ditchfield of Hattersley, Marshall Ashley of Bradford, and Elliot Riley of Mossway and Middleton. Each man had a role. Some carried cocaine, some handled cash, some set up meetings, some supplied customers across 3 different counties. The whole chain held together because each link trusted the ones above and below it. The case reached Manchester Crown Court in stages across 2024. The main trial lasted 14 weeks through 2023 before verdicts were delivered in April 2024, with 12 defendants found guilty of conspiracy to supply drugs and possession of criminal property. A further retrial concluded in August 2024 when 3 more men were convicted. Jonathan Smith, the top man on Swinstead Avenue, was sentenced to 17 years in prison. Louis Cleworth was jailed for 14 years and 8 months. Jacob Smith received 10 years and 10 months. Kyle Salt was jailed for 10 years and 8 months. Reece Story was sentenced to 9 years and 9 months. James Kilcourse received 7 years and 8 months. Elliot Riley was jailed for 8 years. David Ditchfield was sentenced to 15 years and 6 months. Marshall Ashley was jailed for 11 years and 3 months. The August 2024 retrial brought the heaviest sentences of the whole investigation. Anthony Nichols, born on the 9th of June 1992 and living on Alder Avenue in Bury, was jailed for 17 years and 6 months for conspiracy to supply Class A and Class B drugs. Waqar Ahmed, born on the 20th of July 1986 and living on Fountain Street in Nelson, was jailed for 15 years for the same conspiracy and for possession of criminal property. Mark Haig, born on the 29th of May 1968 and living on Scholes Street in Bradford, was jailed for 11 years for conspiracy to supply Class A drugs. The original Operation Bowler investigation into James Mulligan had already jailed 11 men in 2023 for almost 70 years. When every sentence from every connected case was added up, the total prison time handed down passed 200 years. What brought all of this down was not a single selfie or a rap video. It was patient surveillance, phone analysis, and a drug gang that trusted its own confidence far too much. And every number from every Manchester case so far only tells part of the story. The full scale of what Operation Venetic has done to the criminal underworld is far bigger than any one gang. Section 10. The Reckoning. How Operation Venetic dismantled Manchester's underworld. Before April 2020, the idea of a British police force reading the private messages of tens of thousands of organised criminals in real time would have sounded impossible. EncroChat was advertised as uncrackable. The people paying £1,500 every 6 months for their handsets were told, again and again, that no intelligence agency in the world could ever get inside the network. That promise turned out to be the biggest lie the criminal underworld had ever been sold. For 74 straight days, from early April 2020 until the middle of June 2020, French intelligence officers sat silently inside the EncroChat system and watched everything. Every message, every photo, every voice note, every boast, every deal, every video of cash being counted or weapons being handed over. All of it was copied and sent to the National Crime Agency in the United Kingdom, which then passed the relevant material to local forces, including Greater Manchester Police. The operation was codenamed Venetic, and it became the single largest law enforcement operation in British history. The numbers alone tell the story of what happened next. According to Greater Manchester Police and the National Crime Agency, more than 2,200 criminals across the UK have now been convicted as a direct result of what EncroChat revealed. More than 3,300 arrests have been made. More than 2,000 suspects have been charged. Courts across the country have handed down a combined total of more than 10,600 years of prison time. Nearly 6.5 tons of cocaine have been taken off the streets. More than 3 tons of heroin. More than 20 tons of cannabis. 173 firearms have been seized. Almost 3,500 rounds of ammunition. More than £84 million of criminal cash has been recovered. And, most importantly of all, more than 200 planned acts of serious harm against real people have been stopped before they could happen. Greater Manchester accounts for a massive chunk of those totals. Within the region itself, Operation Venetic has led to over £2.5 million in cash being seized, nearly a dozen firearms recovered, more than 1,100 rounds of ammunition taken in, over 12 kilograms of Class A drugs removed from circulation, over 25 kilograms of Class B drugs recovered, and more than £300,000 worth of luxury assets like designer jewellery and high-end vehicles pulled out of gang hands. More than 200 people have been detained in the Greater Manchester area alone since the operation began, and more than 150 of those have gone on to be formally charged with drug, firearms and money laundering offences. Over a 3-year stretch, Greater Manchester Police have confiscated 252 illegal firearms from the streets of the region and have put organised crime members in prison to serve combined sentences of almost 500 years. The pattern inside every single one of those cases is the same, and it is the pattern this whole video has been about. The men at the top of these gangs were not caught because they were stupid. Many of them were highly organised. They ran serious businesses that turned over millions of pounds. They had contacts on every continent. They knew how to move drugs, launder money, and protect themselves from rival groups. What brought them down was not a lack of intelligence, it was a total loss of caution, caused by a false sense of security. Detective Constable Mark Walby of the Greater Manchester Police Serious Organised Crime Group said it in the clearest possible words after the Jaime Cassidy case concluded at Manchester Crown Court. He said that Cassidy and his colleagues had got far too comfortable with their encrypted phones and had started bragging about their personal lives. He said that this bragging had just confirmed what police already knew about them, and he said it was the bravado, the endless boasts, and the endless messages that had landed these men in prison for a very long time. Detective Sergeant Colin Shackleton, the senior investigating officer on the Jamie Rothwell case, said something very similar after that sentencing. He described the supply of Class A drugs in that investigation as being on an industrial scale, with profits he called eye-watering. He said that the men involved had believed they were above the law, and that having access to their messages had given officers a real insight into what he called their arrogant, egotistical, and apathetic nature. Every single case in this video proves those officers right. Leon Atkinson was brought down by a photo of himself drinking a beer in his own garden during lockdown. Jaime Cassidy walked into a long prison sentence because he compared himself to the most famous drug lord in the world while watching a Netflix show. His brother Jaime Cassidy, once a Liverpool football prodigy, ended up behind bars after using an encrypted phone for everything from drug management to everyday life. A simple photograph of a box of painkillers gave detectives a fingerprint. Jamie Rothwell, one of the most dangerous organised criminals in the whole region, was caught in part because he sent a selfie from a sunny apartment in Spain. Justin Shaw walked himself into a 9-year sentence by filming his own crimes and uploading them to YouTube. Nathan Lobley and his crew openly typed out details of firearm handovers and multi-kilo cocaine deals because they believed the phone was safe. And the Jonathan Smith Organised Crime Group kept operating for months after they already knew police were closing in, only to hand detectives enough evidence to bring down more than 200 combined years of prison time. Across every single one of those stories, the message is simple. There is no such thing as a fully private conversation when serious crime is involved. There is no app, no device, no secret network, and no clever handle that can protect a criminal from themselves. The men who went loudest fell hardest. The men who trusted their toys went to prison. And the streets of Greater Manchester, a city region that once felt the full weight of these gangs, are now noticeably safer because of it. The courts have finished their part of the job. Leon Atkinson, the Cassidy brothers, Jamie Rothwell, Justin Shaw, Nathan Lobley and his crew, Jonathan Smith and every man sentenced alongside them are all behind bars. Between them, they are serving hundreds of combined years in prison. The empires they built, the cars, the watches, the villas, and the piles of cash they once photographed with pride have all been taken away. What is left is a prison cell and a very long stretch of time to think about the one thing they all have in common. They were not caught by bad luck or by a snitch. They were caught because they could not stop showing off. That is the real lesson of the Manchester EncroChat story. The louder a criminal brags, the shorter their freedom lasts. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.